My first involvement was, I think, in 2002 at the Wave Hill Conference. And the Wave Hill Conference, I was asked to speak, but I think I was the only non-landscape architect and the only Canadian. So, but I felt quite at home because what I saw there was a passion for landscape architecture, a passion for modernism, and a passion for heritage conservation. Those three things worked very nicely together. The conference was actually called Making Post-War Landscape Architecture Visible. And it was an amazing conference, and I've now been to the MoMA conference as well. And those passions, they come directly from the Cultural Landscape Foundation's founder, Charles Birnbaum. And Charles, before he was the founder of the Cultural Landscape Foundation, he was the coordinator for the National Park Service's Historical Landscape Initiative. And so these things all play together quite well. And I think that these passions have now, in the United States, through the advocacy of Charles and the Cultural Landscape Foundation, have really changed people's ideas about landscape architecture, not only in the public, but I think also for the profession itself. So there's much more of an involvement with the history of landscape architecture, how it's evolved. It's a much more conscious profession. And we're hoping to bring that culture to Toronto. The other things that I saw at those conferences was a really sophisticated idea about what cultural landscapes are. And it's a complex notion, and it requires a fair amount of nuanced understanding. To understand it is a very sophisticated piece of set of ideas about landscape. Cultural landscapes involve understanding the history of a place and understand respecting the designer of a place. So the role of a landscape architect. We look at spaces as natural, but realize that they're actually designed. And then if you understand that in a really strong way, it leads you to an idea about stewardship. So that whether a park was designed in 1860 or a park was designed in 1960, it's still, you can recognize that history, but you still have to recognize that it has to be managed, it has to be, you have to continue to have a dialogue with the public that are using the building, using the park and spaces. And that allows you to think about stewardship. It's not that these things exist all on their own. They really need to be continually working in a dialogue with its public. So we're hoping that that's what's going to happen here today. What we've encouraged, what we're hoping is happening is we've got more than landscape architects in the crowd, that we're involving others as well. I think there's a lot of city planners here today, which I think is wonderful. And we're hoping that we're all sharing an optimism about how the city grows and how we use cultural landscapes to really understand our cities. And it's a crucial time in Toronto. We have a lot of development here. So it's really understanding the carrying capacity of the landscape spaces we have. Now, I'd like to introduce Janet. Because I'm the non-landscape architect of the two, but Janet's a landscape architect who's a major advocate in the City of Toronto for landscape architecture. So it became a natural piece for the two of us to be part of the Stewardship Council. Her work is well, actually you'll probably see on the tours we've organized this weekend a number of her major pieces. So Janet?
Thank you. Okay. The objective of the conference is to develop our understanding of our cultural environment and motivating Toronto to really step up with the goal of creating new models for defining the 21st century city, which once was historic and now is becoming quite modern. And together, Michael and I believe that Charles brings a university vocabulary towards establishing value in our cities. He brings with him culture-based design principles and approaches, as described in the second wave of modernism. And through his work, Charles has become the guardian of the landscape architect profession, a voice that embraces history and contemporary design. This was how we have come to the optimism of the second wave of modernism, one that mines values from the site and its surrounding to at once express the old and the new. So Toronto has 150 cranes in the skyline. You'll probably hear this a couple of times today. And it's ranking the best place to live by The Economist, and is North America's fourth largest city with the world's largest ravine system and a substantial legacy of existing parks. What can Toronto learn about how to cultivate resilience and sustainable urbanism? In a discussion with about 100 city staff at the Toronto Arts and Letters Club a year ago that we sponsored with Charles, we tested the idea of this conference that explores these questions as possible, and we were so overwhelmed by the positive response and the enthusiasm of the city and others to march forward with this, a discussion that's really not happening in a lot of cities, but certainly not in Toronto. Another major takeaway from the city was that it revealed that one of Toronto's great skills is that it's perceived as an ability of a place where we share our experiences, that we're very generous with that, but we're also really open to hearing other people's. So the work that Michael and I have pursued in part is a larger process that really deals with regional, national, and elsewhere in the world of addressing the conditions of modernism. This work follows a brief that public space must be replenished and enriched over time to ensure that they can adapt and thrive over the long term. Today we have the opportunity to bring this conversation into the public realm with wonderful speakers and dialogue, and to explore in greater depth the subject of our own city, the City of Toronto. Now I would like to introduce one of our proud stewards of our great city, our new mayor, the Honourable John Tory. And I would like to say, because he's always quoting his days, that today is your 173rd day in office, which is just under 6 months. As a Torontonian that lives and understands our city, Mr. Tory brings a wealth of personal and professional experience to this conversation. As a Torontonian that lives well before Mr. Tory became a mayor, he was awarded a number as a member of the Order of Ontario in recognition for being a champion of the Greater Toronto Region, and as a founding member and chair of Civic Action, as well as chair and volunteer on countless campaigns for the city. His experience in civic action and celebration and connections to the community manifest in an understanding of the needs of his fellow Torontonians and a unique ability to inform the direction of change in our city, including our cultural landscape. We applaud Mr. Tory's sense of urgency, one that we all share in enriching our city, neighborhood, and public spaces. And we would like to personally thank him for being here today. Please join us on the podium. Mayor Tory.
Well, Michael and Janet and ladies and gentlemen, 173 days. It seems much longer. But I'm just delighted to be here this morning, and I'm in particular delighted to welcome the people from out of town and to say how proud we are and how happy we are that this conference is taking place in our city at this point in time, because there are a lot of issues, and you'll undoubtedly discuss some of them in specific terms today in the context of Toronto and how it's moving forward. On some of them, there will be views different than. There are probably some issues on which I have the responsibility, as you know, from where you all come from, to be in government and to make decisions that ultimately achieve, as best one thinks one can, that balance that's referred to in your own material that I read prior to the conference: a vibrant, social, environmental, and economically sustainable urban model. And of course, I'm constantly confronted, as you are in this business of politics and government, with choices that are sometimes presented by people as black and white or black or white, when in fact that sort of a balance that's, I think, referred to very well in the materials, what you have to try your best to achieve. You're not going to be right every day, but you try your best. Now, before I just say a few words about why it's so important that you're here and what you're doing, I should say to the out-of-town guests, first of all, you're most particularly welcome here. But I do want to bring to your attention, because I don't want anybody to think I didn't disclose this while I was here, there's a provision many people don't know about in Bylaw 732. It's Section 36B, actually. It's an unusual provision we have here in Toronto, where when you leave Toronto, we inspect your luggage going out. This is in order to make sure you've done an adequate amount of shopping while you were here. And so I just didn't want any of you to be surprised, because I know you're busy with tours and sessions you're having here and so forth, when you get to the airport or the bus station or the train station or even at the border, that there will be this inspection of your luggage. So, deal with it in advance, because otherwise you'll be sent back downtown, and it could be awkward. I also want to say that clearly, this organization had its agents everywhere. I mean, it was the most massive effort to make sure that the mayor came, as the mayor would have done anyway, to offer greetings. But Michael approached me at a book launch. I was just minding my own business. Janet approached me in an airport, and Bruce Kuwabara, just to sort of as the icing on the cake, approached me in, I shouldn't probably call it a lobby, but the lobby of the condominium building in which we both live downtown. And I felt myself completely surrounded. And I was going to come anyway, but it was certainly an effort made to get me to come. I wanted to come because I wanted to acknowledge to you that in the context of a leader of the city who is new, that I nonetheless understand, and I'm not an expert. I mean, my background is as a lawyer, and then as a business executive, and laterally, in some strange diversion, I went off onto for 5 years as a talk show host, which was great fun. It is, by the way, I'd commend it to any of you, because you could probably do it. You have to sort of learn how to talk for 3 hours, and I have no difficulty with that. But the most satisfying part of it is that you control the whole show, as most of life now, with a computer mouse, and if somebody's really irritating you, it takes only the exertion of that much effort for them to go away. And think about where else in life that can happen, where you can just do that and people disappear. So it is, but my background, of course, in all of those things has not really caused me to have any particular exposure to landscape architecture, or even more importantly than understanding landscape architecture itself, understanding what an integral part it plays of a well-planned city that is that city that, to use the words that were used in your material, a vibrant, social, environmental, and economically sustainable urban model. But I guess what's happened is, as I've been taken before and during the time that I've been mayor to various places where I can see the integrity of landscape architecture fitting together with the rest of what we've done in both the public realm and the private realm, I've come to understand when you see it done well, you can see what a difference it makes. And conversely, when you see that there's been no attention paid to it, you can see that it sells our community short. It sells the things we're doing in the community short, whether they be private or public in nature. And so I'm delighted at the tours that you have in front of you. I gather there are literally 1,300 requests people have made in this audience to go and see different things in the city. I thought even the putting together of all those different places in a book with pictures and a short description, they're descriptions that I, as a lifelong Torontonian, have in some cases not seen before, that offer a little bit of history of why things are the way they are. I have some favorites out of that group that I would commend to you, and some of you are going to see these. Something very new is the Aga Khan Park, which most people, even in Toronto, haven't been to see yet. It's not even officially open. I think the park is officially opening in the next couple of weeks. But I think, again, you can see that something, if you had to describe to people what is landscape architecture, they would be able to see that. It would be obvious to them. I happen to love Corktown Commons Park, which many people have signed up for and is in the book. I think it's a magnificent example. And when I was doing a study on Ontario Place, which is a very special piece of real estate on the waterfront of Toronto that is in need of refurbishment, I saw there that when we spent the time, when we spent the money, and when we had the determination to ensure excellence in the design, that we achieved something very special at Corktown Commons Park, which is part of the broader waterfront revitalization that we're doing, which is quite big in size and quite historic in the context of our city. And so I hope you'll go to see that. There's also a wonderful little park that I just love called Cloud Gardens, which is right in the heart of the downtown, in the midst of all the buildings. And I found it by accident. But again, somebody's very carefully designed that, and there's an architecture to that, and there's a magnificence to that tiny little park that is surrounded by all these high-rise buildings, and it's so peaceful there you can hardly imagine that it is where it is in the city. So I'm glad that you're going to see all of these things and many more. You know, it was made mention by Janet of the cranes that are in the city, and we're proud of that because it represents a confidence in Toronto that the world has, because 50% of the people who live in this city were born outside the country. It's the highest percentage of any city, major city in the world. And that brings with it certain challenges with respect to embracing diversity, which I think we do. And I think one of the reasons we rank so high on all these lists you see, if you think about the size of the city, it's not one of the biggest in the world. It's certainly one of the newest. in the context of its real total history, which is not that long. But I think people see the way we live together here, and that goes back, literally centuries, that we've embraced diversity as something that is of huge benefit to us in many respects. But I think a large part of the way we're going to have to focus now is not take our eye off that ball, which is to make sure that nobody's left behind, which is very much a part of Canadian values, and that nobody doesn't feel embraced by the city and by the country, and look as well at the experience we're having with sort of designing the new 21st century Toronto, because the amount of growth that has gone on here is, of course, incredible and substantial. But I think we have from time to time taken our eye off the ball. I was reading a very interesting book, which I think even would be of interest to people from outside Toronto, but it talks about the sort of life within the sort of the immediate downtown precinct back in the sort of 1800s, which for us is sort of, going back, way back in our history, because it's not that long. And you see in the pictures all of the heritage we allowed to be destroyed, some of it that just in the cause of progress, I guess, as it was seen back in the 60s and 70s. And you recognize the fact that if we don't focus on these things, which very much includes the question as well of landscape architecture in private and public parts of the domain, somebody will be writing a book 100 years from now and saying what was wrong with those people. And I'm sure there'll be some discussion of some current decisions we have in front of us right now and positions that I've taken that have been somewhat controversial on that. But again, remember that in addressing those things, you have to achieve that balance that was said in the very material that's in front of this conference, which is that balance between economic sustainability and the environment and the social life of the city in creating this urban model. One thing that for sure I don't think has been in front of us, and I know Jennifer Keesmaat is speaking here later this morning, that I think we have focused on but not in as disciplined a way as we could, is the fact that as you have more and more people living in intensified development downtown, which is a good thing, and it shows again confidence in Toronto, and it shows a lifestyle, if I can call it that a lot of people, especially younger people, have chosen. I don't think we've been as rigorous as we need to be, and you'll see some of this for yourselves, and I'm sure we'll benefit greatly from your comments, those from out of town. As rigorous as we should be at making sure there is that attention paid to the outside realm in buildings that don't have family rooms and backyards and front yards. They are by definition a different kind of living space for people, and we're starting to pay more attention. In fact, I'm going to the groundbreaking this morning. I don't go to groundbreakings for every condo building because it's not a good use of my time, among other things, but I go to the ones that are sending a message, and some of them are sending a message. The one this morning is going to have an affordable housing component as well as a special affordable housing component for artists. But others have done some things in the context of the public realm outside of the building that are worthy of note, and I want to draw attention to those things when I go, and that's why I go to the ones that I do. And I just think that we're going to have to pay much more attention in the light of the fact that there is no backyard, no front yard, no family room, et cetera, to other things we're going to have to do as a city to make sure that we present to people an opportunity to live in the way that we can be proud of going forward. I also think this is going to be hugely important to us, what you represent as a profession in landscape architecture, to our ability to attract jobs here. At the end of the day, if we don't attract jobs and new investment here, then all these people who are coming here, and this city is growing rapidly, among the most rapidly growing cities in North America, then we will not be able to sustain those people being here. I mean, they need to be employed, they need to have a place to live, they need to have a place to work. And I think that the kind of overall environment that we're creating, that vibrant, social, environmental, and economically sustainable urban model, must include consideration of landscape architecture and the kind of excellence we can see for ourselves where we've done it right in Toronto. And it's not just recent. There are other examples you'll see on that tour where we've done things right over time, but I think what we have to do is maybe take ourselves on these tours from time to time, including those of us in public life, and say, these are things we did right, and we want to keep doing them right so that we can have a city that's very livable, but also a city that is attractive to people to come and invest, and the two, of course, are very much interlinked. I want to mention one thing that's not on the tour, and it doesn't even belong to us, but I'd like to get it back from the federal government one day. We have a huge piece of land that belongs to our national government that is almost right in the geographical center of the city. And I think to have your various buses and cabs and so forth that you're going on these tours and go buy this piece of land, have you spend an hour there, an hour's not enough, but you'd probably have 1,000 ideas of what we could do with it. And it's something called Downsview Park, and it's not really yet a park in the true sense of the word. It used to be an air base, and the federal government sort of, I think generously and with the right ideas in mind many years ago, said it was to be a large urban park, and it's big. And it, to me, presents one of the most magnificent opportunities to do something spectacular in the center of a big and growing city that we have. But as you would expect with a lot of these kinds of things, it's been kind of mired down in various discussions and disputes about who sort of owns it and who runs it, and the result is that nothing much has happened. It's a little better than it used to be. But if you look at it, it just represents a spectacular opportunity. I wouldn't say there would be one of you that are landscape architects that wouldn't go there and say, boy, could I do something with this if I was given the responsibility. And so I just hope that maybe we can get it back, because when the government that is in our nation's capital, which is, you know, somewhat far away from here, relatively speaking, has charge of it, they're not as likely to move on it and to be bold as if maybe the city government had it and said, all right, we can do something with this that is truly magnificent for us to have, but also for the rest of the world to see. I will just conclude by saying that a word of thanks to Charles Birnbaum at the Cultural Landscape Foundation and to Jane Abaddon, who is the co-curator of the conference, for giving international attention to our city's development. We will benefit not only from your presence here, all kidding aside about the shopping, but we will benefit from your presence here, because I'm sure we will get feedback that will help us to deal with that challenge that we have of achieving that balance that is necessary to build a great city going forward. And so we're very grateful that you're here. And we also are pleased that the Cultural Landscape Foundation has expanded its purview to include Canada's unique designed landscape legacy, beginning with Toronto, because of course all good things aren't limited to going on here, although you'll hear bad things if you travel around the country about Toronto. Don't believe any of it, it's not true. And I will just say to you that, you know, the job that I now have, and I've been in a position running a big company where I had to make lots of difficult decisions. These decisions are even more difficult because they're very public and they relate to the future well-being of people that aren't even born yet in a great city. But what you do each and every day is you try to achieve that balance, but make sure you don't take your eye off any of those balls. But that includes, you know, making sure that what you're doing represents excellence, yes, in the environment and landscape architecture, but at the same time, making sure you achieve excellence in economic sustainability and in terms of some of the social issues you have to address. And it's the challenging part of these jobs. Those of you who've been around public life and who work inside government know that. But it is, it also makes it incredibly interesting. And I just want to acknowledge how much I now understand, not in any professional way, the importance of what you do, both here in Toronto and in other places around the world. Because when you see something done well, like Corktown Commons, or like the Aga Khan Park, or like some of the things that have been done historically here, you see the difference. And you see the difference that it makes in achieving that balanced city and a great city, which is what we're trying to do. So again, you're most welcome here. I hope your day and your time here is productive and fun. And we've organized half-decent weather, which isn't always the case here. But we just very much appreciate the fact you're all here. Thanks very much.